For over a century, there's been this huge puzzle right at the heart of how we understand ancient Israel's story. It's all about this apparent conflict between what their laws were supposed to say and what some of their greatest heroes actually did. So let's dive in and see if we can untangle this whole thing.
You know, this whole massive debate really just boils down to this one question. Was all proper worship supposed to happen at one single central place? Or was there something else going on? For a very long time, most scholars thought they had the answer pretty well figured out.
And this was the answer they landed on, the Wellhausen theory. Now, the idea here is that early on, Israelites worshipped all over the place, at lots of different altars. But then, way later in their history, a group of reformers came along, wrote the book of Deuteronomy, and introduced this radical new idea: one nation, one God, and only one legitimate altar. And for a long, long time, this was the standard textbook explanation.
But what if that cornerstone idea is just wrong? A Dutch scholar named Wellhausen decided to ask that very question and challenge not just a tiny detail, but the very foundation of this entire historical model.
See, Wellhausen argued that this whole idea of centralization wasn't just one piece of the puzzle. It was the foundational block holding the whole thing together. And if you pull out that one piece, well, Wellhausen's entire evolutionary model could come crashing down like a house of cards.
So, where do we even start looking for clues? Well, let's begin with the historical books themselves and just see what some of ancient Israel's most respected figures were actually up to.
All right, first piece of evidence. This comes from the prophet Elijah himself. Now look closely at his complaint to God here. Notice the specific word he uses, altars, plural. His problem isn't that there are too many altars, it's that the legitimate altars to God are being torn down. This is the complete opposite of what the Wellhausen theory would lead you to expect.
And this is where the theory really starts to run into trouble. I mean, Elijah doesn't just talk about multiple altars, he goes and builds one. Right there on Mount Carmel, he repairs an altar to the Lord, and God answers with fire from heaven, basically giving it a big thumbs up. And remember, this all happened centuries after the main temple in Jerusalem was built. According to that old theory, this should have been totally illegal.
And it wasn't just Elijah. Take Samuel. I mean, he's one of the most important prophets and judges in Israel's history. The Bible shows him sacrificing at Mizpah, at Gilgal, at Ramah, and even setting up a sacrifice in Bethlehem. This wasn't some rare exception for him. This was just his regular practice.
So here's the crucial takeaway from the history. We consistently see these righteous leaders worshiping at all these different altars, and the story presents these actions as perfectly fine, totally legitimate. This creates a massive contradiction with the theory that the law demanded only one altar. So did the law really say that?
Okay, so the historical evidence creates a huge problem. That brings us back to the law itself. Wellhausen argued that maybe the problem isn't with the history at all, but with how we've been reading the law. He went right back to the key text in Deuteronomy that the entire single altar theory is built on.
And here it is, Deuteronomy 12:14. For more than a century, scholars have read this and said, see, one specific, chosen place, in one specific tribe, case closed. But Wellhausen looked at this and asked a different question. Is that what the original Hebrew language is actually saying? Okay, this slide right here, this is the absolute heart of the argument. Wellhausen said, let's look at two key phrases. He argued that in one of your tribes doesn't have to mean a single exclusive tribe. It could just as easily mean in any of your tribes. And in the place doesn't have to mean one single location, but it could be used in what's called a distributive sense, meaning any place that God chooses.
And he had the evidence to back this up, straight from the same book of Deuteronomy. The Hebrew word for one, ehad, is actually used to mean any all the time. When the law talks about a Levite coming from one of your gates, it clearly means from any of his towns, not just one specific town. So the language totally supports this reading. And it's the same deal for using the in this distributive way. I mean, think about it. When the Bible says the soul that sins will die, it doesn't mean only one specific person is going to die, right? It means any soul that sins. This linguistic pattern shows that reading the place as any place God sanctions is completely valid.
So let's put all this together. This rereading totally changes the meaning. The law isn't some radical new command to centralize everything in one spot. Instead, it's a command to worship only at places God has specifically chosen and approved, whether that ends up being one place or many.
And all of a sudden, that big conflict we started with, it just starts to dissolve.
When you look at the law this way, the history starts to make perfect sense.
And this slide really brings it all home. Under Wellhausen's view, you have this constant conflict. The law says one thing, but the heroes of the faith, like Samuel and Elijah, are doing another. But under Howard Dodd's reading, you get harmony. The law allows worship at any God-approved altar, and that is exactly what we see Samuel and Elijah doing.
And here's the real takeaway. We no longer need a complex theory of religious evolution to try and explain away a contradiction. Why? Because with this understanding, the contradiction was never really there to begin with. The law and the history were telling one cohesive story all along.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. It just goes to show how the entire historical reconstruction of a nation's faith could all hinge on the translation of just a few small but incredibly powerful words. Could something as simple as reading one to mean any completely change the story? It's a powerful reminder of what we can find when we're willing to re-examine the very foundations.